Hello everyone and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. The other day I did a video on George Harrison, taking a look into his life by looking at his book, I Me Mine. So today we're going to see the section where he explains his songs. George's songs will give us another side to see of this great performer and songwriter. Let's see what we can find out. George placed a lot of songs in his book, but the video would be way too long to include them all, and the ones chosen are ones that deserve to hear the reason why George wrote it. So the first song is Don't Bother Me. This song is special because it was the first song that George Harrison wrote. He was sick in his hotel room in Bournemouth, England in 1963. It was summertime. George was resting to conserve his energy for the show with the Beatles. He wanted to see if he could write a song. George didn't think much of it. He said, I don't think it's a particularly good song, and it might not even be a song at all, but at least it showed me all I needed to do was keep on writing, and then maybe eventually I would write something good. It did, however, provide me with an occupation. I love the song because it has the dark theme, a kind of negativity that wasn't a usual perky song, and it was a good first attempt regardless of how George felt about it. Next we have Taxman. George got mad when he realized that even though the Beatles were earning money, they were giving most of it away in taxes. He said it was and is typical. He wondered why. He asked, are we being punished for something we have forgotten to do? George had John help him write the song. George had asked John to help with the song, and John did so only because he loved George. It was Lennon's suggestion to use the names of both Prime Minister Harold Wilson and opposition leader Edward Heath, the first living people to be directly named in a Beatles song, according to the BeatlesBible.com. The best lyrics in the song are, if you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you try to sit, I'll tax your seat. If it gets too cold, I'll tax your heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. So I think we all can relate to that. And then Ringo added the cowbell to the song, and surprisingly, Paul McCartney's doing the guitar solo. Great job. Next up is Blue Jay Way. George said he rented a home in Los Angeles on Blue Jay Way, and George had arrived from England, and he was waiting for his friend Derek and his wife who were living in L.A. And George stated, I was very tired after the flight, and the time changed, and I started writing, playing a little electric organ that was in the house. It had gotten foggy, and they couldn't find the house for some time, and the mood was slightly Indian, and Derek Taylor, he said, is partly Welsh. So knowing these facts makes the song better than what I first thought about it. The organ and him being tired and trying to stay awake for his friends makes this song stand out. It has that tired feel to it, just like John's song, I'm So Tired. And I wonder if George fell asleep before their arrival. And this was from the album Magical Mystery Tour, and it had that psychedelic Indian-sounding vibe to it. Very different sounding. Next we have While My Guitar Gently Weeps. George was reading the Chinese book I Ching, the Book of Changes, and George stated, it seemed to me to be based on the Eastern concept that everything is relative to everything else, as opposed to the Western view that things are merely coincidental. George had been visiting his parents at their home in northern England and decided to write a song based on the first thing he saw when he opened a book. So he picked up a book, opened it, and there were the words, Gently Weeps. He put the book down and started the song. At first, Harrison said he played the song for Lennon, McCartney, and Ringo, and they had no interest in it. I knew inside of me it was a nice song, Harrison said in a 1987 interview. George persuaded them to let him do the song, and he asked Eric Clapton to do the guitar solo. According to songwriter.com, Eric said, oh no, I can't do that. He said, nobody ever plays on Beatle records, and I said, look, it's my song, and I want you to play on it. So Eric came in, and the other guys were as good as gold because he was there. Also, it left me free to just play the rhythm and do the vocal. So today, it's a classic song. So what were those guys thinking when they said they didn't like it? Now we have Old Brown Shoe. George stated, I started the chord sequences on the piano, which I don't really play, and then began writing ideas for the words from various opposites. He put in the lyrics, I want a love that's right, but right is only half of what's wrong. And he said it was a duality of thing, yes, no, up, down, left, right, wrong, etc. So take two of the song had George Harrison doing the lead vocals, guitar, organ, John Lennon, piano, backing vocals, and Paul McCartney, drums, bass, backing vocals. So this song is so different and catchy. John Lennon said it was his idea to have the song on the back of his single, The Ballad of John and Yoko. So somebody got their money's worth when they had this 45 with those two songs on it. Here Comes the Sun. This is one of my favorite songs. George said in his book that Apple was getting like school where they had to go and be businessmen. All the signing accounts, sign this and that. George said that winter in England goes on forever, and by the time the spring comes, you really deserve it. George decided to leave work early and went to his friend Eric Clapton's house. He was walking in his garden, and George was happy not to be around those dopey accountants, as he said. He was walking in the garden with one of Eric's acoustic guitars, and he wrote the song. So what an inspiration that garden was. This song always sounds new and beautiful. Now we have something. George wrote this song while the Beatles were doing the White Album. George was on a break while Paul was overdubbing, and he went into an empty studio and started to write it. George said that's really all there is to it, except the middle took some time to sort out. The song didn't make it on the White Album because they'd finished all the tracks. He gave the song to Joe Cocker, and then George just did his version later. George said it was his most successful song with over 150 cover versions, so I'm sure there's more now since George said that quote in his book in the year 1980. George said his favorite version was the one that was done by James Brown, and George said that was excellent. And when George wrote the song, he pictured Ray Charles singing it, and later Ray did do it. And then George liked Smokey Robinson's version too. Now we have For You Blue. I love blues-sounding songs, and this version by George is a good one. He stated in his book the song is a simple 12-bar song following all the principles except it's happy-go-lucky. And that's what makes it great. I could picture George smiling when he said that. Now we have the song What Is Life, and I remember hearing this song when I was 11 years old, and it blew me away. I still love the song to this day. The guitars, the horns, it all blended so well together with George's singing. George said this song was written for Billy Preston in 1969. He said he wrote it very quickly, 15 minutes or a half hour maybe, on his way to Olympic Studios, London, when he was producing one of Billy's albums. So George got a little bit intimidated when he got to the studio, and then he didn't want to say, Billy, I wrote this catchy pop song, while Billy was playing his funky stuff. So George used it on his album, All Things Must Pass. Good thing he kept it for himself because it was a major hit for him. Now we have Crackerbox Palace. Last but not least is another great song I've always loved. I didn't understand what it meant. I just loved the words and the tune. And now we find out George's inspiration. So George was at Cannes for the Midham Music Festival in 1971. And George met a man and talked to him, and he told the man, I don't know if this is an insult or a compliment, but you remind me of Lord Buckley. And the guy told George he managed him for 18 years. George said that was an incredible coincidence. George said in the book, I Me Mine, that Lord Buckley was a hip comedian, and he was very up all the time, and he was very important to George during the 60s. George Griff, he was the manager for Lord Buckley, and George Harrison talked about him. And Griff said Buckley lived in an old beaten-up house in Los Angeles, which he called Crackerbox Palace. George thought, that sounds like a song, and wrote it down on a cigarette pack, and he went home and wrote the song. The lyrics that are really great are, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, it's all a part of life. And another part of the song I like, and the lyric is, know that the Lord is well and inside of you, and that's comforting. So George Harrison may not have started his songwriting as early as John and Paul did, but when he got started, he made up for it. By the end of the Beatles, he was just the greatest songwriter as they were. George stated after writing his first song that he wasn't sure his first song was much of a song at all, but if he kept writing them, he would get better. George certainly did, and we're all grateful you kept on writing all the songs you did. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would help the channel out, and I would appreciate it. And I hope everybody's been having a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.